Necrito es uno de los creadores de contenido más grandes como de lore en el juego, de League of Legends, y se mandó un videazo de 27 minutos sobre el hecho de que el mundo del MMO, del próximo MMO de RIOT ya debería estar listo. Y curiosamente, el director del juego, del MMO, pues lo compartió y dijo que no puedo confirmar ni negar esto. Básicamente confirmando de que sí. No se sorprendan de verdad si el MMO de repente el año que viene o el que le sigue nos muestran un teaser. No sería tan descabellado, sinceramente. Papito Hippie, gracias por el raid.
Making MMOs was hard. On average, an MMO has to spend at least 6
Es verdad, con la camisa de Hearthstone, qué perro.
years in the baking before it can get anywhere near being good. But that didn't stop companies from jumping onto the bandwagon anyway. And soon we could see dozens of new MMOs, all releasing in 2008, all being called the WoW killers. Spoiler alert, none of them did that. And unfortunately, we
sí, cada MMO que sale es el asesino de WoW y ninguno puede.
MMO is announced, we all think the same thing. Oh. Anyway, when you're working on an MMO, you have to respect 3 pillars. Gameplay is king, social interactions matter, and the world setting is important. When Riot announced their MMO, it became clear that 2 of the pillars are being respected, and the third one is already done. When it comes to the gameplay, it is currently in the hands of Ghostcrawler, someone who's been working on WoW during its best times, and someone who got a reputation for hate.
Que trabajó antes con... Creo que fue director de WoW, ¿no? No estoy loco también. Y también estuvo metido en la polémica de Blizzard en su momento, de los bichos random que... Bueno, ustedes saben cómo fue todo ese rollo. Y también estuvo metido allí.
Hating boomkins and loving mages. When it comes to the social interactions, it is a dance between the developers and the players. A dev can guide players towards social interactions, or they can annihilate them. And after that, the players usually find their own fun inside the MMO. From that point on, the devs should do everything in their power to support the players having fun in their own way. And finally, when it comes to the world of an MMO, in Riot's case, it's done. And it's been finished for quite a few years now.
Que el mundo de LoL ya está terminado hace rato.
Is in such a good state. They already have the continents, the zones, the cultures,
continentes, regiones, todo. Ya está listo prácticamente.
Every zone already has its
que es lo más complicado. O sea, cuando haces un mundo de este calibre, o sea, un juego de este calibre, rellenar los espacios vacíos es lo que más tiempo de desarrollo lleva. Cuando la parte creativa ya está listo, ya pues queda el desarrollo, ¿no?
Now,
o sea, modelado, mierda, ya cosas in-game.
You wouldn't know about this. And that's why I decided to make this video. I want to show you all the zones we are going to see in the MMO and what sorts of quests we are going to do there. So, for the purpose of this video, I will assume you have no idea what League of Legends is about. You have no idea what the universe is about, but you like MMOs, your hairline is receding, and you have a crippling fear of Nintendo 64 controllers.
O sea, es un video para gente que de repente le gusta el MMO, pero no conoce tanto el LoL, ¿no?
To which I might add, why do you think I'm wearing hats?
Que es cómico esto, porque yo no sé si será el único, porque la gente siempre dice, no, que los MMO, que la cosa, pero no son un género... No sé cómo explicarlo, son juegos que a nivel mediático no son tan... ¿Saben? No mueven tanto, o sea, no lo mueven tanto como uno creería. Siempre es como que tienen un pico enorme la primera semana, todo el mundo habla del juego y a las 2 semanas está muerto. Obviamente que no, la gente lo sigue jugando, pero a nivel mediático es como que ese juego desapareciera. Cosa contraria con LOLcito o otros juegos más mainstream, pues.
But now, without further ado, let's have a look at all the zones in Riot's MMO. This is Runeterra, the world of League of Legends. Right now, the world is separated into 10 main regions. But these 10 regions don't cover all the land on the map, so there are some mini-zones in between them. And the lore already revealed that there is gonna be another continent further to the east. That definitely sounds like a future expansion to me. In fact, it would be foolish to
Cualquier parte del mapa que no conocemos prácticamente es una posible una posible nueva expansión. En todo el sentido del mundo.
release all
Porque tengo entendido que para la parte derecha ya se está expandiendo por allí, ¿no? Entonces, eventualmente sabremos qué hay por allá, ¿no?
of these regions at launch. You can easily turn half of these into separate expansions. And because a lot of people already know and love these regions, the hype behind these expansions would be big. With that said, I know a lot of you would like to play as Shrimans or Ionians. And now you may be cursing me for suggesting that these would be expansions. But the lore can justify giving you these nations as playable races without having their regions. I'll show you how Riot can pull this off in a bit. First, let's talk about the regions Riot's MMO has to start with. The Northern Continent. This entire continent is called Valoran. Not Valorant, Valoran. And this is where
Continente
the
se llama
absolute
Valoran.
core of this world is. The two main regions here are Demacia and Noxus. They are the two big rivals equivalent to the Horde and the Alliance. While I would like to say that Demacia is your classic normie human region,
Demasiado pequeñita, ¿no?
it's not really true. Runeterra doesn't really have a normal place. There is something cool happening in every region. And Demacia has racism. Okay, maybe not racism.
Qué
because Demacia
increíble este mapa. ¿Este mapa dónde está? Esto existe. Esto es la página web de Universo. Qué increíble cómo se ve.
doesn't mind Yordles or Minotaurs, but they really hate mages. That's because in the past, their rivals almost annihilated half of the world using magic. And so, Demacia was built inside a magic-absorbing forest. Therefore, Demacia is a really cool place where you can hide from magic. When it
Qué épico debe ser de verdad. No me canso de decirlo, de verdad jugar un MMO basado en lo loco. Qué verga tan epicarda, Dios.
comes to the visuals of the zone, you can
Mierda,
see
qué
a
verga
lot
tan
of
buenísima,
white
loco.
fields. It is
¿Te imaginas a
surrounded
ver a Valor por allí?
by
El bicho
mountains,
volando.
but the iconic part of Demacia are the buildings. They are made of petricite, which is a combination of stone and the magic-absorbing wood. Because these ancient magic-absorbing trees were grey, all the buildings have a marble-like appearance. And yes, given what material they are
Nunca he
using,
jugado un MMO. Bueno, cuando pruebes uno que te guste de verdad, y que su universo te guste, que la jugabilidad te guste, olvídate de tu maldita vida social y... Eso es mucho peor, la verdad. O sea, que alguien me diga de que nunca ha jugado un MMO es mucho peor. Porque va a llegar virgencito para ese momento y se te va la vida en eso. Se te va.
all the buildings in Demacia also absorb.
Lo malo, en mi opinión, que los MMO siento yo que... Depende del tipo de jugador que seas, ¿no? Si eres muy casual, pues excelente, ¿no? La pasas bien y todo el rollo. Pero son juegos que necesitas amigos para realmente exprimirle la parte linda. Es como LOL. Es una experiencia totalmente diferente si lo juegas con un equipo. Si lo juegas solo, se vuelve demasiado monótono y solitario. Y segundo, de que son juegos muy absorbentes. Y para ciertas personas que quieren jugar otras cosas, se te complica, pues no te da chance, ¿sabes? 24/7 con esta mierda o no.
Magic. So should a mage visit this region, let's just say it's gonna be a painful experience. On top of this, let's not forget that Demacians can weaponize petricite. They can turn it into petricite steel, which gives you your
Además, es el counter de la magia.
weapons, and
Hay
you
que
can
ver cómo lo
spot
hacen en
petricite constructs which wake up
este juego.
after absorbing magic. Simply said, these guys just really don't like magic. The irony is, they've been absorbing it for years now. And this is where the story would kick in. You
Qué
see,
increíble que
Demacians
todo
are
esto visualmente nos los dio olor. Toda esta mierda, casi toda esta mierda, visualmente nos los dio olor. No sabíamos, o sea, graficaron todo, ¿sabes? De manera visual lo que es Runeterra. O sea, bueno, mejor dicho, lo que es Valorant, ¿no? Y, verga, eso es tremendísimo, loco. Porque teníamos lore y lore, pero lore escrito, ¿sabes? Lores e historias que, ok, para el que le gusta leer, bien, pero coño, una ayudadita visual no cae mal. Y todo esto fue por lore.
are so afraid of magic, they founded the Mage Seeker Order. This is an order of people who hunt mages, they throw them in the prison, and
Me falta, no, ya sé que estoy viendo esta mierda como un huevón 13 minutos.
they torture them until their body gives up on magic. So yes, being a mage is a crime in Demacia. The thing is, people still get naturally born with magical abilities. You can't stop it from happening. So not only are there mages hiding in the royal court, right now there is a mage civil war happening in Demacia. where mages and people who don't hate mages rise up to fight for moral rights. So should we do some quests in this zone? This is gonna be the core story. Mages trying to overthrow racist leadership following old laws.
Claro, o sea, si van a ver quests, seguramente estén ambientadas en este punto histórico, ¿no? Donde hay guerra civil y todo el rollo, pero el rollo de la antimagia y los magos y toda la paz. Está bueno.
So the main enemy NPCs might be mages and witches. But I know what you're thinking now, and don't worry. There will be plenty of boars to kill here too. Or at least there are loads of wolves here, as well as stags. And we can't forget the
Claro, los mobs de mierda que hay que farmear.
iconic Demasian raptors.
Claro.
But further to the south, we might find
Y
some
mascoticas y toda mierda, pues.
tiny woolly elephants, and yes, of course, in the Argent Mountains
Dragones,
there are
¿no?
also dragons.
Dragones, claro.
Loads and loads of dragons.
Hadrin,
But that's
la
about it for
montaña.
Demacia. Fun fact, the capital city of Demacia is called the Great City of Demacia. Sounds dumb, but Runeterra was not the first one to come up with this. But thankfully the other regions are a bit more creative with their names. So now let's move away from the normie region and let's have a look at the badass region, Noxus. If you're
Es que si lo pongo en pantalla completa, no lo van a ver realmente en pantalla completa, pero, o sea, lo puedo poner, pero... O sea, se va a cortar parte del video, pero bueno.
planning on playing a warrior with oversized weapons and overcompensating lush hair, this is the region for you. This place
está hablando de
actually has
Noxus,
a
okay.
long and badass history, but we really don't have the time to explain it now. So just know that originally it was built by the most badass warrior in the history of Runeterra. This motherfucker literally died on a mountain of corpses. And after he died, he was
Murder.
too angry to stay dead, so he just became the god of the underworld. When this guy lived, he built the Immortal Bastion, which is to this day the largest structure on the entirety of Runeterra.
No, no sabía la estructura más grande de toda Runeterra, no sabía esa mierda.
He is banished underneath the Immortal Bastion, but only a few people know about it. So, you know, that's a future raid boss.
Claro, verga, loco, qué locura esa verga, ¿verdad? Murder tiene toda la pinta de ser un boss, de ser una raid, ¿no? ¿Te imaginas con tus compas allí, 5 huevones, 4 huevones, todos contra Murder? LOL.
Anyway, the Immortal Bastion is the capital city
Pa'
of the
farmear
Noxian
Murder.
Empire, with Noxus being one of the most brutal nations in Runeterra. It is brutal because the nation is surrounded by rocky earth. It is hard to grow plants here. So Noxians are forced into conquering surrounding land for resources to survive. That's why when you go to the map you can notice that the Noxian territory is all over the place. It's because these are all the places Noxus has already conquered. Although, when I say it like that, you may imagine Noxus brutally raiding everything. But that's not true. They like to absorb the surrounding nations into their empire. After all, it's just more human resources. Most of the time, they only remove
Bellísimo ese
the
tipo.
royalty and they
Me
let the
encanta el arte.
leaderless people join their empire. And that's because Noxus values strength above all. And rulers tend to not be good fighters. This is what you can see in the After Victory cinematic. They kill the king because he was weak and let everyone else join them. Fun fact, conquering nations is so iconic for Noxus they have their own saying. Kill them until they are family.
Mátalos antes de que sean familia. Verga, Noxus. Un Scorpion, bienvenido.
Although this region has its own unique enemies too. Inside the Immortal Bastion there is a cult known as the Black Rose.
La Rosa
This
Negra.
cult is connected to the darkest of magics. So be ready to fight hemomancers, witches, demons.
Verga, ¿te imaginas Atacan?
Legion, which is an army of soldiers
Atacan,
revived
loco.
with blood
Si Atacan
magic
tiene toda la pinta de boss
fight
también.
for the Empire again. And when it comes to collecting
Vale, imagínense toda esta era como mob sword allí, ¿no? Que misiones en cositas que tienes que ir farmeando.
passes, here we have the native Drakehounds and Basilisks.
Claro.
Now, while Noxus and
Increíble.
Demacia are the main rivals here, both of them are also constantly repelling raids from the north.
Es tonto pensar de que todo esto ya lo sabemos y lo tenemos o sea, lo tenemos allí en la mesa, pero si no es porque Necrit me lo dice, ¿sabes? De esta manera no soy capaz de visualizarlo todo de manera conectada, ¿me entiendes? De verdad imaginarme cómo sería el MMO.
So now,
bueno, está
let's
bueno.
have a look at the Freljord.
Freljord.
Just like pretty much any region on Runeterra, Freljord has a long history. But for the purpose of this video, Just know that the maddening old gods known as the Watchers of the Void, who want to devour the entire reality only because it keeps waking them up, once tried to breach into reality here. They almost succeeded because they tricked the Ice Witch Lysandra into helping them. Fortunately, she realized how wrong she was, and she managed to freeze half of the kingdom.
Imagínate ver toda esa mierda, loco, increíble. Caminar por esas montañitas, toda esa verga.
Is the only person holding back the end of reality by keeping the Watchers frozen. So at some point in the future, you bet one of these woken up frozen Watchers is gonna be a raid boss.
Claro.
Now, when it comes to the NPCs, this is where things get diverse. First of all, remember that the Freljord is brutally cruel. Everything is frozen, and survival is everything. So the first enemy here would be the wildlife. From Rhymefangs to Yetis to
todo el oro. Me encanta.
to Mammoths to the worst of them all, Poros. Next we are going to fight
los poros no, aquí no se pueden morir poros. Los poros tienen que ser mascotas. Aquí tú no puedes matar poros acá. Imposible.
Themselves. There are three main tribes here. The Avarosans, who are quite peaceful, the Winter's Claw, who are quite brutal, and the Frostguard, Lysandra's followers who hold back the Watchers. And let me tell you, these guys have some badass armor. Among the notable tribes there are also the Ursine, which are shamans who worship the Volibear, the primal god of the wild who slowly turns his worshippers into twisted animalistic monstrosities. Speaking of which, yes, there are also the primal gods of Freljord. And finally, we need to talk about the Iceborn. When the Watchers tried to arrive here, they tainted the ice around them. This special ice is called the True Ice, and it is so dangerous you literally die if you touch it. However, the Watchers also tainted some people, giving them the ability to touch the ice. It is still extremely painful for them to hold a true ice weapon, but at least they can survive it. These people are known as the Iceborn. But people were not the only things that were tainted. There are also ice trolls, some of whom are also Iceborn. To be honest, these guys were made to have their own dungeon. But there are also some animals that were twisted by the Watchers. And Lysandra is even twisting some beings herself to make them serve her. So overall, Freljord is gonna have a lot of cool warriors, shamans, and horrors. So these would be the three regions on the main continent. But this place is actually so big, it can easily make the base world of the game.
Claro, exactamente. O sea, todo esto es tan grande que ya aquí se pudiese decir, porque a ver, no va a salir todo Runeterra con el juego. Es imposible. O sea, hay que partir de una base y que las siguientes expansiones, como mínimo, duren un año completo. Por ejemplo, Piltover y Sound saldrá un año después del lanzamiento del juego y que aguante lo suficiente como para que dé tiempo de hacer la siguiente expansión arriba del segundo año. Ya solo con Noxus de Mage Seekers tienen la base del juego prácticamente hecha. Tienen la base del juego. Por eso sí, papá, me tiene que sacar mi Jonia porque si no me pongo triste.
Especially since there are a bunch of smaller regions in between them. There is Nockmerge, full of witches, Argent Mountains with their dragons, Tokugo with void monsters, Dalamore Plains with him, and so much more.
Sí, Trea.
But from here, you can cleverly set up the expansions because...
Coño, ¿cuánto falta, gente? Verga, se me olvida, güey. Ay, chingada. 4 minutos, hay chance todavía.
Well, everything is interconnected.
Bueno, vamos por la mitad.
Now, let's have a look at the continent to the east called Ionia. Ionia has a very close connection
Bienvenido,
to Noxus.
Aleolfo.
You can only guess why. It's because Noxians
¿Qué dijo?
connection to Noxus. You can only guess
que tiene su conexión con Noxus.
It's because Noxians once tried to conquer it all during an event simply called...
Claro, es que ya hay partes que son tan pequeñas, ¿sabes? Que no tienen quizás tanto peso a nivel... No, sí tienen peso argumental, pero de terreno no. Como para que de repente la incluyan directamente en el juego, habría que ver. Si las incluyen, es una expansión, ¿me entiendes?
Of using children as soldiers because Noxians thought Ionians wouldn't fight back against children. And chemical weapons. Lots and lots of chemical weapons. Speaking of which, remember Singed from Arcane? He's the guy who chemically devastated Ionia. Eventually, Noxus failed, but they kept their small controlled territories. So the first quest here could be simply boarding a ship, sailing over, and exploring the place for the Noxian Empire. Now, when it comes to Ionia itself, the place gets mystical. Everything here is alive and connected to the spirit of nature.
Claro, el mundo espiritual,
And
toda esa
I mean
mierda.
everything, from the animals to the people to the buildings. Everything is alive. So if you anger
Tranquilamente desde Johnny me imagino entrando por un portal que nos manden a otra parte del mapa, todo cambiado, todo vuelto loco, con animales y mierdas vergas espirituales, verga, tipo Avatar, por ejemplo.
nature, your house can twist and strangle you in your sleep. So you can only imagine how Mother Nature fought against Noxians. Usually a river came alive to drown them. That's why all the buildings here look like they were woven from wood. It's because they were. With nature magic, people let nature build their houses. It also means that sometimes your house can just walk
Mira,
away.
mira, pasar por ahí,
When
por
it
toda
comes
esa
to the
mierda.
NPCs here, obviously there is gonna be a lot of nature spirits. And a lot more of simply mystical animals. From giant flying tigers to the never
Sí, sí vi, Nikyu, sí vi.
But be ready to also face local Ionians, blade masters, shadow cultists, murderers, and ninjas. Both good, bad, and the in-between. But finally, there is also one more enemy that we could face. The furries.
No,
That's right, this race is known as the
Bastaya.
Bastaya. They are
Claro.
half humans and half magical animals. And yes, canonically, the species was born in exactly the way
Te
you
lo dan
are
apenas
thinking.
clasificas, sí, Mati. Apenas clasificas, te lo dan. Porque los asiáticos lo pusieron ya en Twitter. Así que, para que sepan que tienen chance de ganárselo por allí.
But to be fair, the Vastaya are quite cool and they are definitely gonna be a playable race. Just like Yordles, who also like Ionia a lot. Lastly, after Noxians
Johnny.
ravaged Mother Nature, demons started occupying
Claro,
all the
sacanas,
places
demonios.
filled with misery and doubt.
No,
So
hermano, yo
that's
es que
gonna
yo
be a
aparezco en
nice
Johnny
bonus
directamente.
added. So yes, the exploration of Ionia and the raid on the Shadow Order could be a really cool
Ya me imagino una misión secundaria súper arrechísima para que Johnny te dé una espada súper potente o una habilidad más arrechísima. No, no es que me vuelvo loco.
expansion. But it's definitely not Riot's only option, because we can also go south to Piltover and
Piltover y
Dawn.
Sound.
These are the ones people will
Man, este
know
me sabe un
about,
poco más a culo,
simply
la verdad.
because this is where Arcane took place. Piltover and Zone are two
Pero sí, a nivel de popularidad, aquí fue Arcane. Pues aquí todo el mundo, me imagino que mucha gente se... El que capaz no conozca tanto el LoL se animará más por esto.
massive cities located one above the other. And they are so massive they could easily be turned into their own playable zones. They are both
Coño, ya sí son ¿no? Pero seguimos.
focusing on futuristic technology powered up by magic of the Hextech gemstones. Using this magic, they can power up anything from guns
Quedamos en
to
Piltover.
augmented limbs to vehicles. Visually, it is simply futuristic Victorian era. And unfortunately, there wouldn't be much of enemy variety. We would likely fight the rich houses of Piltover and their deadly assassins, with the occasional thief on the streets, corrupt wardens, and the occasional rogue steam golem. But things get a bit more interesting in the undercity known as Zone. Zone is the dirty underbelly covered in thick toxic smoke. Because the majority
Todas las misiones van a ser en Zone, seguramente.
of people are poor here, they developed a cheaper alternative to Hextech called Chemtech. This artificial green stuff can power up cheaper limb replacements, as well as highly unstable weaponry. Zone is also controlled by the Chem Barons, which are obviously gonna be the main enemy here. But on the side, we may also meet some chemical mutants, unstable
Mundo.
constructs, as well as some mass murderers and people who hunt down mass murderers. And funnily enough, at the very bottom of Zone itself, there are the hidden ruins of an ancient city full of traps. That is...
Esto es cierto. Esto es verdad. No sabía esta verga.
And funnily enough, at the very bottom of Zone itself, there are the hidden ruins
Ah, acá donde se la pasa es real. LOL, no sabía.
of an ancient city full of traps. That is obviously gonna be a cool dungeon. So yes, there is not much more that I can add here. Piltover and Zone were simply explored in Arcane. So if you like the series, you are gonna like this place. From here, we can travel further south to Shurima.
Shurima.
Shurima used to be a massive empire that ruled the world.
Shurima me gusta. Shurima me gusta. O sea, me atrae.
But after the emperor got betrayed by his best friend, the entire empire collapsed. This region is a massive desert with the occasional city.
Y pensar que esto era lo único. Siempre este tipo de artes conceptuales ha sido lo único que hemos tenido visualmente de todas las regiones. Además, obviamente, de los artes oficiales, de los campeones y todo el rollo. Pero así era antes. O sea, la única forma que teníamos para saber qué coño era Churima era así. Era por cosas como esta. Y son artes conceptuales, pues ni siquiera son ya arte, tú sabes, pues bien pulido y bien pulcro como el oro.
Near a river. In the center of the region,
Precioso. Yo quiero estar ahí, hermano. Ahí quiero estar yo. Mira esa mierda, loco. Imagínate esa mierda. No, increíble.
A colossal piece of star metal that has the power to reflect celestial magic. The Shurimans use this celestial magic to turn their best soldiers into the Ascended, also known as the Golden God Warriors. However, these God Warriors wouldn't make a great enemy here. That's because after the Emperor had died, the Ascended started fighting for leadership. And slowly, after learning how to use blood magic to gain the edge, they morphed their own bodies and became Darkin. Twisted, blood-frenzied monsters that would certainly make really cool.
Acá vienen ellos, así que...
Besides this ancient evil, Shurima is also full of its own animals, raiders, dune scavengers, and on top of all of that, void creatures. That's because to the south, there used to be a kingdom known as Icathia that wanted to destroy the Shuriman Empire. So, they asked
Shurima tiene mucho lore.
The Watchers for help. You can imagine how that went. The Watchers sent through some void beasts that consumed Icathia and polluted Shurima to this day. To fight back the void, Shurima does have a lot of hidden tombs around with hidden god warrior weapons. Not to mention that Shurima also has a circle of time mages who are trying to freeze the void in time. Now, as I mentioned near the beginning of the video, even if Shurima becomes an expansion, they can still easily make Shurimans a playable race because they are already connected to Noxus. As you can see, of course, Noxians already conquered part of Shurima, so some Shurimans are fighting for Noxus. Also, as a cool fact for those of you who liked Arcane, Hex Crystals are harvested in Shurima. That's why a Shuriman expansion would be a great follow-up to Piltover and Zone. And again, that's why Riot can easily turn only the northern continent into the base world.
Sí. O sea, está contextualizando el hecho de que es muy probable que sean las tres regiones principales. O sea, de que todo el juego base parta de acá, además siendo Inferior. Porque prácticamente que de ellas se desprenden muchas historias que ya conectan con Piltover, con Inferior, con Jonia. Pero el core es esto, básicamente. Noxus es casi que lo principal, ¿no? Todo pasa por Noxus prácticamente.
Anyway, going west from Shurima, we arrive at Mount Targon. This place is incredibly unique. First of all, this mountain is not natural. It was literally pulled up from the ground by celestial gods. And that's because this place serves as a portal to the celestial realm, also known as Targon Prime. Now, because this mountain was pulled up, it also has some unique features. For example, you may find frozen lakes frozen horizontally on the mountain. And the very peak of the mountain is special too. Should a mortal reach the peak despite the brutal climate and the deadly wildlife, either they die from exhaustion, or the celestial gods deem them worthy and they become an ascended aspect. There is aspect of war, aspect of the sun, aspect of the moon, aspect of the twilight, aspect of the guardian, and so on. Simply said, after people reach the peak, they become some of the strongest beings on the entire planet. So of course, the mountain is full of people who worship the celestial demigods. And I speculate
todo esto estaría lleno de quests y mierda.
This is where we could get a lot of cool armor sets.
Consígueme tal cosa en el monte por allá por el coño de la madre.
Aspect of the sun. Then there are the rivals, the Lunari, who are devoted to the aspect of the moon. But also, the tribe I assume will become a playable class, the Warriors of Rakor. Of course, besides just humans, Targon also has all sorts of furry Vastaya. Near the bottom of the mountain, you may notice that the mountain is alive, but also there are stellar corns, a variety of mind-bending creatures, and loads of dragons. Speaking of which, remember that this place is linked to the celestial realm. So this is where we may also meet the star-forging celestial dragon Aurelian Soul, as well as all sorts of other celestial beings. A lot of these would make for interesting bosses. In fact, the Ascension of Mount Targon would be a really cool raid.
Claro. Lo que dije, toda la subida del Monte Targón debe ser un raid, una alta quest.
Next, on the other side of Shurima, there is Ishtal. This is a special place where people are mastering.
Esa gente que le gusta Ixtal, ¿qué le pasa a esa gente que le gusta Ixtal? La región más X no puede haber en el mundo. ¿Quién coño dice, coño loco, qué región tan interesante? ¿Qué les pasa?
They are using it for everything. Fishing, smithing, walking, and this place is definitely gonna be saved for an expansion. Basically, remember when Icathian asked the Watchers for help? And then that happened? Ishtal was their neighbor, and after they saw the Void devour an entire kingdom, they believed the Void would soon devour the entire world. So, using their elemental magic, Ishtal built massive walls of plants around their entire region, isolating themselves from the rest of the world. For 3,500 years, Ishtal stayed isolated, believing that the world outside of their walls was devoured by the Void. But now, very recently, some mages found out that the world outside is completely fine.
Ellos creían que estaban aislados. Ellos creían que estaban aislados. Y recién se están enterando que no, por 100 años. ¿Qué es esto, Wakanda? Pobre gente. Ahorita lo reviso, papá. ¿Quién es el segundo chan más fuerte de Targón después de verle un sol? Yasuo si va a Targón.
Fine. So now the Ishtali mages are slowly revealing themselves. To be honest, Ishtal is the most underdeveloped region in Runeterra. We know the region has a lot of hunting Vastaya, deadly plants and some elemental dragons, but most of the region is still a mystery to us. So at least here, Riot will have the freedom to try something new. But now, we'll leave the main continent to visit the last two regions. First of all, there is Bilgewater. If you like pirate adventures, this is gonna be your place. This is where we are going to explore inns and gambling dens, even some local temples worshipping the god of motion, Nagake Boros. Here we are going to fight pirates,
Piratas.
sea monsters, sea witches, sea Vastaya, maybe some demons. And possibly we'll side with Sarah Fortune to fight the king of the pirates, Gangplank. But there's a lot more here. Last year, Riot released their RPG, which was set in Bilgewater. So not only can we already explore...
Coño, gente, manden una sub para la tarjeta de video. Dios mío, una tarjetita de video para yo jugar ese jueguito. Lo tengo ahí abandonado. No me corre muy bien para los directos. Lo quiero jugar, pero en directo.
this place in detail.
Coño, le tengo unas malditas ganas de pasármelo.
But it
Jugué como nada, como unas 3 horas, pero no me corre bien y quiero jugarlo en directo, la verdad. María.
even has a monster journal. And at a quick glance, you can already see some really cool bosses too. However, this place is also linked to the last place I want to show you today, the Shadow Isles.
Isla de la
See,
Sombra.
every year, the horrors of the Shadow Isles
Tremendísimo.
run out, and Bilgewater just happens to be the closest place. So every year, Bilgewater is fighting the undead. Once upon a time, the Shadow Isles used to be the Blessed Isles, a rich place full of advanced magic. Long story short, there was a young asshole king who wanted to revive
Solo un evento de Diego me vuelvo loco.
dead queen. And in the process, he accidentally released dark necromantic magic. This magic destroyed the island and made it home for undeath. In the lore, this event is called the Ruination. And because the RPG is called the Ruined King, it may not be a surprise to you that you also get to explore the Shadow Isles there. And there they have anything you can imagine.
Sacaron hace poquito la skin de Diego. Las skins de Diego son una mierda. Cuando el arte tiene una Cyberpunk que es buenísima. O sea, el arte in-game me parece un cider. Pero le sacaron esta, la de pre-ruina. Hermano, está preciosísimo. Se llama Rey Diego, ¿no? Creo que se llama la skin. Está bellísima esa skin. La quiero, la deseo. Hace años que no juego a Diego, pero lo tengo también en maestría 7, pero está hermosa esa skin. Slay, ¿dónde vives y cuáles son tus specs? Vivo en Venezuela. Mis specs son un i5 de cuarta generación, una GeForce GT 710, una mierda hace como 15 años literalmente, 8 GB de RAM y ya, básicamente.
Undead horrors creeping everywhere. And should we ever venture into these islands? I have
Hexes me
no
dije sin
idea who
equivocarme,
we're
está
going to
complicado.
find. The ruined king
Muy
who
complicado.
caused all of this is banished elsewhere. Thresh, who siphoned his magic after he was banished, also left the isle.
Ah, hermano, que ganas
And
de
even
esta mierda.
Hecarim, the most brutal soldier of them all, is
Ahí van, y ahorita viene también el Metroidvania de LOL. ¿Cómo se llama? El Chrono Ruptura se llama. De Echo, por cierto. Unas ganitas, pero. Unas ganitas de viciármelo, loco.
around Demacia.
Viciármelo. Ese me lo van a enviar segurísimo. Si no, bueno, me voy para la oficina y los mato. Les robo los malditos códigos. Pero eso me lo tienen que dar. Y así sea a un FPS, pero lo hago directo.
So the Shadow Isles don't currently have a
No, y los Metroidvania, bueno, por lo que vi en el teaser, se ve que es bastante simple. O sea, que no creo que sea muy exigente el juego.
baddie. So this is
Se ve que
where Riot push
rinde bien.
forward some of the side characters. Now, even though these have all been the regions that are currently set up on Runeterra, Riot has already confirmed that there is a new continent further to the east. Currently, it is planned to be revealed in the upcoming Ruination novel. And so far, we know that this new continent is where the ruined King Viego is from, and this is also where he was banished at the end of his story. All we know about that place is that it is quite mystical. There are yet more dragons here, and in fact, Kamavor, which is the ruined king's nation, has a lot of draconic armor. So should Riot run out of places to explore, don't worry, they can always make up more. But that's all I wanted to show you today. As someone who's been following the lore of League of Legends from the very beginning, I can tell you, I'm very
¿Una qué? Una R9380. ¿Cuál sería su...? Es que yo no estoy al tanto. Dime su equivalencia en Nvidia para sacar una idea.
very confident the setting of Riot's MMO is gonna be great. Their incredible writers have been preparing the world for years now.
9050.
And now, it's time to harvest the fruit. If you like this video, let me know in the comments below. Because right now, I
Eso,
still
tan cara
have
las tarjetas de
3 more
video.
topics that I could
No, pero
talk
está bien, papá,
about in
gracias.
regards to
Te
the
aprecio igual.
MMO. I especially want to talk about the potential raid bosses we can face.
Una 1050 yo
and
venía.
the potential classes we could play.
O sea, pero lo que yo
And
hago...
as someone who has collected an unholy amount of transmog, I would love to show you all the cool armor sets this universe has. But that's it for this video.
¡Se acabó!
See you in 6 to 8 years when the MMO gets released.
No. 6 años... Tanto no va a ser. No creo yo que sea tanto. No creo. Y teaser... Yo no... A mí no me sorprendería. A ver, yo creo que Riot no va a caer en esas prácticas hijas de su puta madre de estar vendiendo humo. Porque no lo han hecho, sinceramente, casi nunca lo han hecho. Por lo menos con sus juegos actuales. Pero a mí no me sorprendería que de repente en el próximo E3, en el del año que viene, 2023, saquen un teaser, no estoy hablando de in-game, ¿no? Un maldito teaser, una cinemática de nada, 1 minuto. Tranquilamente lo veo posible. Sin fecha ni nada, pero para que la gente por lo menos se acuerde de que el juego existe y de que sigue en camino. Tranquilamente. Pero tanto no sé. Hace 6 años no creo. Todo depende de qué tanto quieran ocupar en el juego base. Porque la gente cree que el juego recién empezó, el juego ya lleva su tiempo. Depende de la base, ¿no? Depende de qué tanto contenido salga al principio. Depende totalmente de eso. Porque será el caso para el 2025, el juego puede estar listo, tranquilamente. 2024 también puede que esté listo. La base. De allí que sigan, de allí a que saquen expansiones, bueno, y es otro tema. Y esa es la parte más importante, realmente. O sea, qué tan frecuentes son las expansiones desde el lanzamiento. Porque sacarlo, digamos que sacarlo es lo sencillo, pero mantenerlo actualizado para que el público no se pierda, allí está el drama total. Que es lo que les pasa a casi todo el 90% de los MMO. Si las expansiones son lentas por X o por Y, la gente se olvida y pasan al más allá. Hice un video sobre las clases, ¿no? Acá está, RIOT MMO. Races and Clases. Clases. 30, verga, este dura más que el otro. Una huevona, coño, tu madre. ¿Lo has pasado, negro? Aquí está. No, lo virga. Papito Darfco, gracias por ese Prime. Gracias a toda la gente que ha mandado Prime hoy. Coño, han sido muchos, la verdad. Bueno, las que han regalado. Se aprecia muchísimo. Recuerden que mañana, no se los olvide, vamos a transmitir todo otra vez. Los que clasifican al top 22. Y con sorteito de 10 paquetes de 700 monedas. Se van a sortear para el chat. Cortesía de Papito RIOT. Así que los espero mañana a la misma hora, como de costumbre. Mañana tenemos las cartas de Orn, seguramente. Las cartas del kit del próximo campeón, que va a ser Orn. Pasado mañana Orn. El martes notas del parche. Y ese mismo martes, acá también en directo, probando las nuevas cartas. Gracias al acceso anticipado de Papito RIOT también. Así que, para que estén al tanto, ¿ok? Me alegra, mi negro, me alegra. Vamos, gente, damos esto un ratico. Nos quedan 20 minutos exactos para la siguiente partida. Así que vamos a ver qué onda con esto. Vale, Necrit, enséñanos. Esta es la segunda parte en teoría.
I'm back. Last time we had a look at the World of Riot's MMO, and we talked about how...
Me da risa como el hijo de puta anda vestido. Literal se parece a mí en un directo cualquiera. Se pone un chorcito, una cholas y la camisita. Y la camisa, coño, que se ve que está más usada que el coño de la madre.
World design has been done for a few years now. If you have...
Esas cartas te las dan gratis o solo por usarlas, es solo por un día que las puedo usar, más nada. Es una cuenta exclusiva en un servidor exclusivo.
Have no idea what League's universe is about, I would recommend watching that one first. But now that we learned about the basics, we can dive into the other big MMO topic, the playable races and classes. When it comes to the races, just like the world, they are...
Este video va de clases, básicamente, todo el tipo de clases, subclases y toda mierda, para saber más o menos dónde se pueden ubicar dentro del MMO. Que esto realmente es lo que más me interesa, la verdad.
Are pretty much done. Over the years, the lore fleshed out the races of Runeterra, and now they each have their own unique story. In fact, at this point, it feels like we know Riot will not make up a brand new race. Of course, they could always theoretically do it, but I seriously doubt they would. Because that would be like forcing a new race into the world of Lord of the Rings. It would feel off among all the already established rules. I strongly doubt you wanna put a bunny person next to Aragorn. With that said, don't worry, because the lore will allow Riot to make up new races and make them feel natural. I'll show you their clever system in just a moment. But for now, just know that yes, we already know the races of this world. So the question is not going to be what races Riot is going to make up. The question is going to be, from the races that already exist, which ones will be playable.
O sea, ¿cuáles por probabilidad van a ser las más jugadas? Van a ser las posiblemente jugadas, ¿no? Las introducidas en el juego. De base, básicamente. Que imagino que van a ser las razas más populares y todo ese rollo, ¿no?
And perhaps more importantly, how will they be playable? You see, a few years back...
Y las que mejor se introduzcan en el lore. O sea, que tenga mejor relación con historias.
I released a similar video where we talked about the classes and the races together with TB Skyen. And today, I would not recommend you watch that video. Back then, I was still clinging onto the idea that faction-based MMOs were a good idea. It worked for WoW, and it worked for my guilty pleasure, WildStar. Unfortunately, what I didn't know is that merely a year later, the idea of faction-based MMOs would crumble to dust. That's because factions have a massive flaw. Besides the fact that PvP is almost guaranteed to be one-sided. I mean, who would want to play for the losing side? Especially if there is no compensation. Classic WoW is a perfect proof of that. Not to mention New World.
Claro, nadie nunca quiere jugar en el equipo, en la facción que va perdiendo a nivel de lore, ¿no?
But also, if you split everyone into two sides, you are splitting up your player base. And that is almost never a good idea. You simply don't want to prevent people from playing together. The reason why in the past it worked for WoW is because
Pero WoW está dividido, ¿no? Entiendo yo. O en algún punto lo estuvo. Creo que ahora te permiten saltarte o cambiarte de clase. No sé cómo funciona el tema. Pero entiendo que en algún punto WoW, las clases... O sea, Sí, pues las clases estaban divididas, entonces si tu amigo comenzaba con otra clase no puedes encontrarte con él o está en otra parte del mapa, algo así, ¿no?
Blizzard
Bueno, eso lo está
heavily
diciendo ahí
played
también.
into the faction pride. People were proud to fight for the Horde or the Alliance. But
Exacto, la
even
Horde de la
back
Alianza.
then, it
Me
really
acordaba.
wasn't perfect. And then people started min-maxing the game and they realized that factions
Horde de la
didn't
Alianza,
matter.
sí.
And that's where Riot has the edge. You may know that League of Legends has a lot of
¿Qué pasó,
different
Cartas?
regions, where they all act independently and they all have unique relationships with their neighbors. Because of this, forcing faction alliances into this world would ruin the already established lore. So PvP factions are most likely not going to be a thing. However, despite that, League absolutely has faction pride. People love it when a new Shuriman champion is announced because people love that place. And people love it when the new champion is not Ionian because goddamn we have too many Ionians.
Sí.
Nearly every League of Legends player has a favorite region. And you bet when the MMO comes out, people will want to play for that region. And this is where the brilliance of Riot's world kicks in. You see, the fundamental lore of League of Legends is based around the idea that anyone can be from any region. After an event the story refers to as the westward migration, races mixed up all around the world. So it's not like there is a furry region where you can only
Sí,
see
es verdad.
furries. There
Cierto.
are definitely regions where you can see more furries, but this
Pero están en
world
todos
doesn't have
lados, como los
exclusives.
poritos, exacto.
This means that when you're picking up what you want to play, besides just picking a race and a class combination, I strongly suggest Riot also allows people to pick their origin, with the origin being the starting region. Without a system like this, you would force all human champions to be, for example, Noxian. And that is simply not how this world works. So, I've been mumbling about how this world works for quite a while. So now, let's actually dive into all the races that exist in
Okay.
this universe. Spoiler alert, League doesn't have too many different races, because it's focusing on depth over variety. Of course, as it is with any RPG, there is the human race. But it would be cool if the
La base,
humans
¿no? Los
varied
humanos, como siempre.
depending on their origins. For example, if you pick a human from the Freljord,
¿Qué sería
they
yo?
would be an Iceborn and they would have extra frost resistance. A Demacian could have a bit more magic resistance, Ionians could have a bit more nature resistance, Shuriman's heat resistance, and so on. I think it's going to be crucial for Riot to preserve the feeling of every origin feeling at least slightly different. This is an RPG after all, and despite the fact that balancing is usually a big issue, I strongly believe these RPG elements have to be preserved. But if Riot is afraid of people min-maxing the game from the very beginning, focusing on the origin stat with the most value, Riot can always do the safe thing and only give each origin different customization. In the Freljord, people tend to be more pale with lush beards and Nordic tattoos all over their bodies. Shurimans have the classic dreadlock style. People from Bilgewater have the pirate crew tattoos. Piltovans are your fancy mustache people. And Ionians have the wild untamed hair and beards.
Papito, ya
So even
sume, rey.
without special origin stats, I do believe these unique character customizations would enhance the region pride too. So that's what humans would be about. Pretty versatile and nothing too special in an RPG world. So now let's
la
have a look at the
típica.
more unique races. After
Okay.
humans, the second most
Vastaya.
spread out race are the Vastaya. As we mentioned in the last video, the Vastaya are a race that came to be after humans.
Yo no soy muy
started
fan
mating with
de
magical
este tipo de
animals.
criaturas
But the thing is, the
que están en todos los MMO, bueno, en cualquier universo, ¿no? De fantasía. No sé cómo se le dicen los... No sé, sí, los furros, pues, pero no sé cómo se le dicen en otros universos. No me suelen gustar, la verdad.
depending on where they are
Se
from,
me hacen rarísimos.
there are loads of different kinds of Vastaya. From cat boys to fox girls to lizard girls. In fact, here's a family tree of all the Vastayan tribes.
De verdad. Esto es un árbol como genealógico de los Vastaya. Marai, no, ok, de cada clase. Vastaya, humanos, Vastaya. Claro, Vastaya es la unión entre un humano y ¿qué? Y un Vastaya Chairei. Pero ¿cómo es eso? O sea, la unión entre un humano y un burro. Un bicho se cogió una burra y salió una batalla. Medio semi-burrita, semi-humano. ¿Cómo es eso? Shapeshifter. Tribes of the Sea. Marai, los de Nami. Magara. Landwalker Tribes. Ok. Sira. Ofelis. Pero por aquí hay un montón que ni conozco, que nunca he escuchado. Kilash. Ari. Verga.
And even this doesn't cover all of them. And this is where Riot can pull off something genius. As I said,
Neko es un
this
bastalla.
world already...
¿Pero qué es eso? Son como bastallas más puros. Claro, porque Neko no parece. Neko sí no es humana. O sea, Neko sí parece un animal en todo el sentido de la palabra. Un animal que habla, ¿no? Como quien dice. Claro, por eso es que hay batallas que se parecen más. Claro, por ejemplo, Seth es un o sea, Seth es un fucking humano, a lo mejor Seth de batalla no tiene nada. Seth de batalla no tiene nada. Pero entiendo que es porque el papá de Seth es noxiano totalmente y la mamá es bastalla, algo así, ¿no? Entonces por ende salió más humano que bastalla. Creo que es por eso, ¿no?
has set rules. So it would be very difficult to introduce a brand new race into this universe. However, it is going to be very easy to just make up a new Vastayan tribe. So I propose that Riot doesn't make the Vastaya as a playable race overall, but instead it would be cool if Riot let the specific tribes to be playable races. This would leave the door open for them to introduce new playable races later down the line. If they cross off all the Vastaya at once, they kinda shoot themselves in the foot. But
Ah, ok, que bueno, no todos se podrán jugar, ¿no? Pero los Vastaya tienen que llegar porque sí, según se muere la gente.
I know. Here I go mumbling about how the world works again. So let's have a look at some of the specific tribes.
¿Qué pasó?
When
¿Se te fue la
I say
luz?
Vastaya, most people
2
think
horas,
of
no, huevona.
Ari. She comes from the Vasani that look like foxes. Although her tribe is mostly
Bueno, aquí se fue el internet media hora antes de comenzar, por cierto.
gone, the lore can justify new members to be found, so they can be playable. The Kilash tribe comes from the jungles between Shurima and Ishtal. These lion-like people are known for hunting dangerous beasts, and they take great pride in trophy collecting. It's the average mount collector. The Shimon tribe are monkey-like people from Ionia. While their older members are very wise...
LOL, puso el seguidor de G. Coño, este video entonces es reciente. O sea, salió hace unos días, porque el seguidor salió hace... ¿Cuánto? ¿Hace 4 o 5 días salió Master G?
Their younger members can be very goofy. The Otrani come from Mount Targon, resembling the classic ghost people. Their hobbies are taking care of the Stellarcorns. The Lothland tribe are Ionians who resemble bird people. This tribe likes to combine the art of dancing with lethal assassinations. The Uvikat are something close to lizards, though they do have the ability to shapeshift. Out of all of the other tribes, these are the closest to their pure blood ancestors. And we also technically have the Marai, the fish people whom I doubt are going to be playable. Imagine modeling boots for them. Now, these were the more
sí, los Marai no pueden ser jugables, sería una pesadilla.
blood tribes. But there
no, tienes que hacer mundos submarinos, o sea, una ladilla.
Are many more Vastaya who don't fit any of these. For example, Set has an Ionian Vastayan mother and a Noxian human father.
Ah, lo que digo.
So he doesn't really have a tribe. Long story short, the Vastaya are an incredibly versatile race and Riot can use them in a million different ways.
Okay.
This is where they can really go wild. But that's it for the Vastaya. So now, let's have a look at the third most popular race. The Yordles. These are the
¿Qué asco me esta mierda?
classic RPG tiny people. In League of Legends, people either
de pana, ¿quién coño quiere ser un fucking... Bueno, es que no, me cansé.
adore them or hate them. There is no in between. Kinda like those guys.
Mira eso, qué horrible,
guys,
loco.
everyone hates them. There is no doubt in my mind that Yordles will be playable.
Son horribles,
even
loco.
though they have an interesting catch. You see, unlike all the other races on Runeterra, Yordles...
Ya, ¿qué dijo? ¿Que no van a ser jugables?
Guys.
Todo esto hipotético, no es su opinión. ¿Pero qué dijo?
But not those guys, everyone hates them. There is no doubt in my mind that Yordles will be playable.
Sí.
Even though they have an
mucho.
interesting catch.
Tienen hasta su propio
You see,
universo.
unlike all the other races on Runeterra, Yordles are immortal. They are essentially modes of magic that come from a hidden magical realm known as Vandal City. And because they are made of magical essence, when they die, we don't really know what happens. But we assume they return to the Vandal City and there they respawn. With that said, the lore suggests that maybe Yordles can die, but they just can't die of old age. But let's ignore that, that's a massive rabbit hole. So, you know, when it comes to gameplay, at least corpse running is going to make sense for them. Now, because Yordles are immortal, in most cases they are always happy and cheerful. Even their home realm is very colorful because of that. But then there is also Vex, a Yordle champion who has recently been added
de las
to
pocas que me encanta y porque jugablemente me parece bellísimo.
League of Legends, who gives Yordles an interesting perspective. You see, unlike all the other Yordles, Vex hates living. She hates the bright colors and the cheerfulness. You know, it's the average League player. So Vex is constantly in deep depression and agony. All she wishes for is to leave this world, but she can't, because Yordles can't die.
No, bueno, anyway, eso, los
just
Yordles
like
no pueden
all the
morir.
other races, Yordles can be found...
Bueno, claro, ¿no? Pero envejecen, ¿no? Claro, porque Heimerdinger tiene como, ¿cuánto? 1000 años, una cosa así, 700 años. Pero envejecido, o sea, que sí envejecen. Sí envejecen. ¿Qué tal, perro seco?
All around Runeterra.
¿Cómo estás?
There is Poppy in Demacia, Kled in Noxus, Kennen in Ionia, Rumble in Shurima, and so on. But now, so far we have only covered the races which I'm pretty sure will launch with the MMO. The humans, the Vastaya, and the Yordles are the core of this world. So now we are diving into the races that still exist in this universe. But it's going to be up to Riot if they make them playable. First of all, there are the Minotaurs. The Minotaurs are different from the Vastaya because they don't have magical ancestors. They are just a standalone race. Originally, the Minotaurs controlled the mountains south of Noxus, but because Noxus is Noxus, soon they absorbed the Minotaurs into their empire. With that said, some Minotaurs fled the tyranny of Noxus and they joined the other regions. A great example is Kryl, the Minotaur fighting in the elite armies of Demacia. And yes, the Minotaurs also have the stereotypical sexy female version in this universe, so they can easily be turned into...
Nunca va a faltar el hijo de puta que se hace la paja con esa vaina. Nunca falta. Maldito raro.
To a playable race. Next, in Bilgewater, there is an incredible amount of weird fishy people. A lot of these could be really cool playable races when Bilgewater gets its expansion. Although modeling helmets for a hammerhead shark is going to be interesting. We also can't forget about the trolls. Previously I showed you the ice trolls, but there are also the sand trolls. And here's an interesting fact for League veterans. We have never seen a sand troll, but because of Ezreal's adventures, we know they exist. They should be around Ikaria, which is where Jax is from, who also has 3 fingers, by the way. So it is extremely likely that the mysterious Jax is a sand troll. Regardless, the majority of trolls are united under Trundle, the self-proclaimed Troll King, who is fighting the service of Cassandra, who is a baddie even though she is morally right. So since the majority of the trolls are our enemies, I doubt they will be a playable race. Lastly, let's not forget that this universe also has Yetis. Fun fact, before everything got frozen, the Yeti civilization was very advanced. They even had their own technology based around magic. In fact, Willump, the Yeti Nunu is riding on, is a hologram from the Yeti technology. But then, as the civilization disappeared, the Yetis went a bit more ferocious. So no, they won't be playable either. But that's pretty much it for the races. As I mentioned, there aren't too many different kinds, but that's because Riot is avoiding mimicking other RPGs. That's why there are no dwarves or elves here. Runeterra is simply trying to be unique in every way, and so far, it is working. Now, I also have seen some people asking if Darkin will be playable. To which I have to say, that's like asking if you can play as a god. The Darkin...
Sí, sería muy roto que sabes, que pudieses jugar con Darkin. O sea, que ya de base están. Los están expandiendo, gracias al lore. Pero sí. O sea, no tiene sentido, ¿no? O sea, tienen que ser jugables las razas promedio de dentro de Runeterra. No, no vas a agarrarte. No, voy a jugar con Asir. No se puede. Con un ascendido no se puede.
Are a corrupted version of the Ascended God Warriors. A single Darkin can annihilate an army of 1,000. In fact, the Darkin known as Aatrox is the only being in existence that managed to kill a celestial god. He stabbed someone wielding the power of the aspect of war so hard, the aspect of war died. So no, I don't think Darkin will be playable. Anyway, with all the races covered, assuming Riot is going to use the origin system, this is what the playable races could look like.
Ok. Human, Bastalla, Jordan. Ok. Demasias, Noxus. Los tiene todos. Flareyor solo tiene humanos. Piltover y Sound los tiene todos menos Minotauros. Churima los tiene todos. Ionia los tiene todos. Targón solo humanos y Bastalla. Billwater todo menos Minotauro. Ok.
Humans are versatile, they are everywhere, there is not much to mention there. When it comes to the Vastaya, the common tribes can easily appear in Noxus, Piltover and Bilgewater. These are the regions open to everyone. On the other side, the Vastaya are closely linked to spiritual magic, so you will hardly find one in Demacia, since it is a firmly anti-magic region. And somehow, not many Vastaya were ever mentioned in the Freljord, so Riot doesn't have to force them there. But then we have Shurima, Ionia and Targon. Assuming these would be saved for
Yo me quedé con ganas de ¿sabes qué pasaba?
expansions, they could be used to introduce
Ya, Negri. Echa para atrás porque no me acuerdo qué coño estaba.
Then we have Shurima, Ionia and Targon. Assuming these would be saved for expansions, they could be used to introduce new playable races. Since I doubt all the newcomers remember the names, the Kilash, Lothlan and Otrani are the Lion People, Bird People and Goat People. When it comes to the York...
Este loco se mandó tremendo trabajo, ¿no? Porque literalmente se puso como a buscar... O sea, el hijo de puta se puso como a buscar... ¿Qué región tiene más consistencia a nivel de contenido? ¿Sabes? ¿Quién está más completita? Y se puso a buscar también por clases para saber más o menos por dónde pueden ir los tiros. O sea, hizo un buen trabajito ahí. ¿Qué pasó, Miguel? Toma café. Oye, tú estás en el seasonal, ¿no? Por ahí vi tu nombre. Sí, todavía estoy.
Portals, as I mentioned, they can originate from anywhere, but they do avoid the Freljord and Targon because of the harsh climates. And yes, I know there were some prehistoric Yordles in the Freljord, but after it got covered in ice, they disappeared. And lastly, the Minotaurs can be found in Demacia and Noxus. But it does make sense for some of them to flee to the Freljord, and others to travel to Ionia during the invasion. With all of this said, remember, this is just my decently educated opinion. Since the races are pretty much mixed up all over Runeterra, Riot could also lift the limitations and let every race start in every region. And I would be fine with that. Some story would be wonky, but it wouldn't be anything horrible. Although, I still believe some racial exclusivity helps the feeling of RPGs. So, all of this is still only the first half of the video. If you wanna take a break and do your business without washing your hands, now's your chance.
Apenas la mitad del video.
This program will continue in 5 seconds.
Maldito negro.
Did you wash your hands? Okay, so far we only covered the races, which was definitely still the easy part. The much...
No es por nada, pero si me da pereza a mí grabar videos sentado, yo no me imagino este tipo, la cantidad de tomas que hace para grabar un video de 30 minutos. Nada, bueno, me parece.
Much more difficult part are going to be the classes.
Aunque bueno, se nota que no tiene guión, o sea, que le sale todo natural. Creo.
This is where Riot is facing a great challenge. Partially, it's because there are inherently no wrong answers when it comes to designing a class system. You can really make anything work if you put some thought into it. But more than that, Riot is challenged by the setting itself. League of Legends currently has over 160 different champions. They each have unique abilities and together they can define about 40 different classes. I counted them myself. From these, Riot has to pick only a handful to be playable, which means the majority of the classes won't make it in, and people who love those classes will be disappointed.
Sí, la mayoría de clases no
Thankfully,
pueden
I'm
entrar
not
al
a
juego.
designer, so instead
Por
of
lógica.
trying to figure out how to make this work, I'm going to show you all the cool, unique classes this universe has. And again, because region pride is a big part of this universe, you'll see that some of these are tied to specific regions. But not the warrior. That one is different in every single...
A mí me sorprende que... O sea, yo entiendo que Will Reef tiene estas animaciones. O sea, una pregunta retórica e introspectiva para cada uno. ¿Por qué creen ustedes que Will Reef tiene esas animaciones? La gente siempre dice que in-game Will Reef es mejor que LOL. No. O sea, a nivel de textura y de modelado pueden ver que no. Que in-game, al menos in-game, no hablo de las animaciones, LOL sigue siendo mejor que Will Reef. Pero tienen las animaciones, todas estas animaciones de login y toda la paja. Y yo siempre me he preguntado por qué eran esa verga. O sea, el trabajo que lleva a hacer una fucking animación para cada skin y para cada campeón del juego es como vergación. Pero entiendo que, bueno, es un modelado, o sea, es el modelado base y luego lo utiliza para las skins. Pero después entiendo que quizás sea por un rollo de marketing. O sea, de que vende mucho que la gente vea la animación y se crean que el juego es así cuando realmente no es ni de cerca eso. Si ese es el caso, tiene sentido. Es como este rollo que hacen... ¿Cómo decirlo? Hubo una época donde RIOT invirtió mucho en actualizar todo el arte de todos los campeones. Porque tú veías la Worlds y se veía asqueroso. O sea, literalmente veías 5 campeones todos nuevos actualizados y de repente salía a listar un 3 píxeles ahí tieso que no tenía ni sentido. Entonces los manes como que empezaron a actualizar el juego para que estéticamente se viese mejor. Pero, o sea, me intriga mucho que Will Reef tenga esas animaciones tan de PlayStation 5 y después el juego sigue siendo una mierda visualmente, pero bueno.
The warriors
El juego
in
es
this
bonito.
universe
Hablo de
provide
técnicamente.
a unique challenge on top
No es
of the
nada
already difficult
sobresaliente.
decisions. It's because in every region, the fantasy of a warrior is represented by something else. In Demacia, it is the Dauntless Vanguard. These are the classic knights in shiny armor pursuing justice. In Noxus, the traditional warrior would be part of the Trifarian Legion, which is a rank you can achieve after killing your best sparring friend in combat.
Mejor, ¿estoy en serio? ¿Se hacen la del
These
Channinga?
guys, chief after killing your
¿Ya cómo?
warrior would be part of the Trifarian Legion, which is a
Para pertenecer a la Legión Trifariana,
rank you can achieve after killing your best sparring friend in
tienes que matar a tu mejor amigo del escuadrón este de mierda, ¿no?
combat.
En combate. No, huevón, aquel, man, que hay que un Sharingan y tal. Bueno, Noxus siendo Noxus, definitivamente. Esa gente que te dice, no, que yo prefiero Noxus, pues, mátate. Si tú eres esa gente que le gusta Noxus, mátate. Tremenda red flag si te gusta Noxus.
These guys rarely use shields. In Shurima, the classic warrior is the warrior of the Golden Army. These are fighting for the glory of the Shuriman Emperor. In Piltover, you would have the Enforcers. Simply said, it's the cops. People will know these from Arcane. But in a way, the Wardens are the melee warriors of Piltover. But then, in the Freljord, warriors are represented by the Berserks, either wielding axes or giant blades as they worship the primal god known as the Iron Boar. On Targon, we have the warriors of Rakor, which are somewhat themed after the classic Spartan armies. Then, in Ionia, the classic warrior is known as a Blade Master, with samurai-styled swords that have a rich history in this region. Also, there are the Vuju Blade Masters, which are on a totally different level. The Vuju technique is so powerful it was forbidden from using it in combat. The TLDR version of the story is that when Noxus invaded Ionia, Master Yi obliterated entire Noxian legions on his own, before Noxians realized how overpowered he was and they nuked the town where the Vuju Blade Masters were trained. So now there is no more Vuju Blade Masters, just normal Blade Masters. And lastly, the common warrior in Bilgewater would be a brawler.
¿Quién está más roto? O sea, a nivel de lore. O sea, bueno. Bueno, es que son cosas que no sé. Bueno, ¿quién es más roto? O sea, G, Master G o Yasuo. Entiendo que Master G, ¿no? Pero también entiendo que Yasuo usa técnicas de vientos, pero eso es como que súper normie, súper normal. Y entre Yasuo y Yone. O sea, Yone ya posa Sakana. La Sakana le da poder a Yone. ¿Saben a lo que me refiero? Bueno, el hijo de puta levita, ¿no? Obviamente que le da poder. No sabemos exactamente qué tantos, pero literalmente sale levitando en la cinemática. O sea, claramente le da poderes, pero no sé, me intriga. No, bueno, G tiene que ser más fuerte que Yasuo, ¿no? En teoría, ¿no? Más técnica. O tiene espadachín ultra. Bueno, lo acaba de decir, ¿no? Super OP. Pero como también se supone que es uno de los últimos que. Se supone que Yasuo también es como de los pocos que tiene técnicas de viento. Bueno, no, el único que tiene técnicas de viento en Jonia, ¿no? Entiendo que también debe ser especial, pues. Pero no sé hasta qué punto.
You see, I just named 8 different kinds of warriors. How is Riot going to handle this? I don't know. They could just make one warrior class and then just have the players play out the fantasy while wearing cool armor sets. Or they could make it so that every origin has a different skin of the class. You know, all the abilities would be the same, they would be doing the same numbers, but when a Noxian swings a weapon, there is a bloody trail, and when an Iceborne Berserk swings a weapon, there is a frosty effect. But again, this is for Riot to figure out. Now I'm just going to show you all the unique and interesting classes from this universe. In Demacia, we have the Mage Seekers. These are the people who hunt down mages. They carry with them a stone disc called the Grey Mark. This is the tool that allows them to absorb magic. So this would be sort of an anti-magic class. There are also a lot of iconic Demacian scouts. Also, Demacia has a lot of stories about theaters and bards. But Demacia also brought spotlight onto the Sentinels. The Sentinels of Light are people dedicated to fighting the undead. Because the undead can't really be killed with normal weapons. They use the relic stones that can be forged into any weapon. Be it a crossbow, a gun, a really big gun, or even a sword. Fun fact, in the lore, the Sentinel guns don't have triggers. You have to will it to fire with every fiber of your body. So of course, Lucian canonically fired it with his PP. Lastly, this was Lucian canonically fired it with his PP.
Ya entendí.
Lastly, this will be unknown to even veteran League players. But Demacia put a really cool twist onto the Paladin class. You see, in League of Legends, when you play as Garen, his ultimate is to smite his enemies with a giant holy blade.
Y lo que falta,
This made people wonder, is Garen a mage? In Demacia? Actually, no. In the lore, Garen has never done anything even similar to this. And that's because there is something even cooler happening. Most people in Demacia pray to the aspect of justice, which they call the Winged Protector. That's why Demacia has a lot of angelic statues. Coincidentally, the aspect of justice can also be found in League, its scale. So what's happening is that when Garen is casting his ultimate, it is not him magically creating a holy blade in the sky. It is actually the aspect of justice answering his call. So
Es real.
even though this universe doesn't really have a paladin class, which would be casting holy spells, this would be a really cool alternative. People who worship.
O sea que Garen. Sí. O sea, yo pensé que el ulti era sencillamente una representación de él como tirándote encima, ¿no? Pero no sabía eso.
The aspect of justice and let her answer their calls. Pretty cool, but now let's move on to Noxus. Noxians are one of the only regions who harvest black powder, so they also have their own mercenaries with functional guns. In Noxus you can also find a lot of demonic cultists, so I would expect a warlock or a demon summoner, and they also have a few renowned assassin guilds. And the most unique of them all Noxus also has a circle of hemomancers, people who follow Vladimir, a lord who used to be a hostage to the Darkin, and who eventually learned how to use their blood magic. So these people use the very same blood magic that shaped the Darkin. Then in Shurima, we may find arcane mages. These people follow Zerath, the most powerful mage on Runeterra, whose body has been reduced to nothing but arcane energy. I would honestly love to see this class in-game, because I love the idea of having an Archon form on cooldown. Shurima also has some prophets who can open up tiny portals into the void and summon tiny void creatures. It would be sort of like Warlock in WoW. You know, use the power of the enemy against themselves. Then there are the Sand Shifters, people who can use the sand to create sand mirror images. And we can't forget about the Chronomancers, people who use time magic in a lot of creative, interesting ways. Then in Piltover, riding off of the success of Arcane, people will want to play as a Warden, which is a more elite version of the Enforcers. These would be equipped with sniper rifles and stun grenades.
Bueno, no sé. Esto sí se me hace un poco mena, pero entiendo que tiene que haber alguno de ataque a distancia, ¿no? Pero de rango, pues. Pero no sé.
On the crafty side, there are also the Hextech Engineers. These are the people who can use science to allow them to wield magic even if they are not mages. And separate from them, there are also the Artificers. To them, anything from a powerful arm to blade legs should be possible. And down in Zone, I would love to see some kind of an alchemist who's using questionable drugs to help his allies. Next we go into the Freljord. Here we can find the Draklorn Inquisitors, which are Lysandra's followers with abilities themed around true ice. Essentially, these would be frost battle mages. But perhaps the most iconic for the Freljord would be the Shamans. These worship the animalistic primal gods of the Freljord, and all their abilities mimic the primal gods, be it a bear, a fox, a mammoth, or a boar. Then on Targon we would find a lot of people with celestial powers. You know, calling down stars and...
Loco, lo que yo tardé en darme cuenta de que la mano no es que le sale a la cabeza, sino que solo está volteada y de que esto es una máscara. Años, yo ni sabía que esto era así. Yo nunca entendía la forma de la carta.
Such. But there are also the Solari who use the power of the sun to enhance their attacks. They also wear massive plated armor, so this would be the tank class. Or the Lunari, who use the power of the moon to stay in the shadows. This would be more of an assassin class. Besides these, there are also a lot of star callers around, and even draconic worshippers. Then in Ionia, besides the Vuju Blade Masters, which would be far too overpowered, some people choose to fight without a blade. These would be the monks of Hirana. They channel the power of Ionian dragons to empower their limbs. And don't worry, they are a bit different from the traditional monks. They are far more badass. Think less Bruce Lee and more Dragon Ball. But of course, Ionia is also home to the Kinku ninjas. Their goal is to maintain balance in Ionia. This means that when a spirit starts killing people, the ninjas go out and deal with the spirit. And when people start terrorizing the spirits, the ninjas go out and deal with the people. Most of these are your classic ninjas empowered with spiritual magic, but some are using the forbidden shadow technique. And while they surely look evil, just like anything in League of Legends, it's not really one-sided. These ninjas are simply using questionable techniques to protect their homeland. And honestly, the Shadow Ninjas are so iconic for Ionia, I really do believe they will be playable. Then we get to Bilgewater. Besides all the things that you could do with pirates and monster hunting, the most iconic class of this place are the priests of Buru. The Buru worship the god of motion called Nagake Boros. While they are priests, they fight with full physical.
Y realmente yo estoy seguro de que la forma en que están rellenando espacios, o sea, están llenando de lore a ciertos campeones, ciertas historias. G con sus nuevos seguidores dentro de lore, por ejemplo. Yo estoy seguro que el lore nos puede dar muchas pistas sobre qué tipo de clases van a estar en un futuro. Y más por lo que dijo el propio director del juego sobre el lore y todo el rollo. No me parece. No me parece. No, o sea, no lo veo tan descabellado.
Strength,
Porque por algo están metiendo esos personajes con dichos campeones.
while borrowing power from the god to empower themselves. Usually this means the god spawns tentacles to smack the enemies around. But they also have healing powers, so that would be a really cool support class. In Riot's RPG called Ruined King, you can play as Ilaoi, the High Priestess of Nagake Boros. And there you can see all the attacks she can pull off. And this takes us to the
No, ese lore ya está desactualizado. Los que se ven en el arte son los actuales.
last place. Ishtal, which will most likely be saved for an expansion. As I
De
mentioned in
hecho,
the last
ya tengo un
video,
video sobre eso.
Ishtal specializes in only
Con Diego,
one
por cierto.
thing,
Maximoff.
elemental magic. So if elemental mages become a class, and they should, even in League elemental dragons are a core mechanic, they would come from Ishtal. But that's it for all the unique classes this universe has to offer. Funnily enough, when I was drafting all these classes,
¿Y cuánto falta? No sé que se me olvida esta mierda. ¿Cuánto falta? Verga, 4 minutos ya. Verga, Sean, qué rápido.
I realized
Aquí ya terminamos, lol.
a lot of them fall under specific categories. So going with the skin idea for all the classes wouldn't be too unreasonable. But developing so many artistic variations of the classes would be taxing. So overall, I believe Riot should not care about disappointing some players for not including their favorite class. With so many options, it's going to happen anyway. Instead, pick a couple of classes that simply make sense for you. You know, a Blade Master here, an Arcane Mage there, and just have fun. Having fun during development usually translates into great experiences. And I hope I'm not pressuring anyone by stirring up hype. If anything, I'm just happy that people find these videos interesting. And all I'm doing is presenting information that Riot released over the past 10 years. I mean, I know the video is interesting because Asmon only paused 3 times and he said,
That's fucking cool.
and,
I like it a lot.
and,
What the fuck? This is actually really cool. I didn't know any of this.
that to me marks a big success. Next time we are going to talk about all the already established raid bosses of this universe. Which
Ah,
is
los
a
bosses. Ese video está bueno.
very personal topic for me. You know, I am a father, my son is 2 years old. So by the time this MMO comes out, he's going to be just the right age to heal my raids.
Que tiene un hijo y que cuando el MMO salga, el hijo tendrá la edad perfecta para que sea el soporte. La puta madre. Sí, estos seguidores son nuevos. Es más, se puede ver que uno de los seguidores va a ser Solani. Va a ser seguramente la de la próxima Dark. La portadora de la próxima Dark. A ver qué más tiene. ¿No está por acá los nuevos? No. Este es de hace 6 días. Y el original es de hace un mes. Ah, este es nuevo. Sí. Estuvo muy bueno, la verdad. Están muy buenos esos videos. Yo lo sigo, yo llevo rato suscrito a él, pero no los veo todos. Veo literalmente los que me interesan porque el resto son muy... son buenas noticias, pues. No me interesa tanto. Vale, gente bella, 2 minutos.